All right. Happy Friday. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. And welcome to another Future Focused, where I am hopefully doing my job, keeping you 10 steps ahead of what's going on at the intersection of business, technology, and the human experience. Thanks, everybody, for watching, listening. If you enjoy or benefit from this, please do me a favor. Send it to someone, tell them about it, like it, review it, share it, all those good things. I appreciate it. And just want to continue doing this. And if there are things I could do differently or better, please send me a note. Let me know. I do this for your benefit and want to make sure it's doing everything it can to help you. So as usual, I'm going to go through my rundown of some of the biggest things that come to mind that have been on my mind. I promise, for those of you who've been watching the past couple weeks, I know I've touched on a few politically charged topics. Hopefully the way I've touched on them has not been divisive in any way. I really hate division and try my best to try and bring things together. But this week I'm taking a step away from any of those. So if that had you on pins and needles the last 2 weeks, as I was trying my best to thread the needle, you can relax. I'm not going to touch on that this week. I got a bunch of other things that I want to touch on as we get into it. So with that, let's start with one. So I'm going to mention this. I almost feel like his name is Voldemort at this point, but I'm going to talk about Musk, but for very different reasons. Different and not different, and not related to politics, although maybe even actually it is still related to politics. But anyway, my point is, if you haven't been following, Elon, Sam Altman, and OpenAI have been all over the news over the past week because Elon Musk came out of left field or whatever field he's living in, and he made an offer for $97 billion to buy OpenAI. And it kind of shocked everybody for a minute because it was like, wait a minute, what is going on? Because if you don't know, Elon has his own, I can't even remember the name of his, I'm sure it has the word X in it. X. Oh yeah, I think it is XAI. Anyway, he's got his own models that he's been doing stuff with Twitter. And so that threw people for a loop a little bit because they're like, what does he do? Like, why is he buying OpenAI? Which, if you know, Musk has his history with OpenAI. He was involved with them from the beginning, but it just threw people a little bit like, what is he doing here? Why is he serious? And the 97.4 stirred up all sorts of controversy over, is this just like a total troll bid? What's going on here? And for those of you who may not be as familiar, the argument about whether 97.4 billion or not is a good valuation or not is truly debatable, because on the surface, OpenAI is hemorrhaging cash, absolutely hemorrhaging cash. They have not even come, revenue neutral, let alone profitable. And there's really no trajectory for that. Now, that makes sense in some ways as a nonprofit in the innovation space where, just like a biotech company often is, they are not making money. They're a research innovation firm. So they know that is part of it. That's why they eventually ultimately get acquired by a big pharma company that has the money. And once they're ready to convert it to a product, then it goes into the commercial sphere and it's productized. And the focus is less on innovation and more on productization of it. Now, OpenAI has formerly been a nonprofit with the goal of, as Sam states it, I just do it for the love of the technology. Questionable, but the point is, it was really an innovation company. It was about research. It was about bleeding edge technology. It was about all this stuff. And then more recently, Altman said, well, actually, I think we're going to transition to a for-profit entity, which, like I said, it's not necessarily that there's not loads of money being moved around in a nonprofit. I think that's one of the biggest misnomers around nonprofits is there are a lot of people who think a nonprofit means, oh, everybody's in, ripped jeans and, eating saltine crackers for lunch. That's not the case. There is loads of money going around OpenAI, and Sam is ridiculously wealthy. So this is not about, is Sam looking to, become rich? The man is already rich. But what would happen is, I think there's been this shift from research is tiring and it's exhausting. And you start going into spaces that you're like, man, I just don't know that I really want to be here anymore. Like, in some ways, I think that might be where Sam is at least publicly saying some of this. He got into AI to do great things for the world, like so many people do. He had high aspirations of making the world a better place, improving things, all this other stuff. Then the complexities of AI innovation starts hitting. You realize this is tiring and there's really no end in sight. Then on top of it, with the advancements in AI, you suddenly get to a point where you start wading into some very uncomfortable water, which I'll talk in my next point. But as the technology advances, you start having to ask the question, geez, should we even be doing this? Like, I don't even know how I feel. But as a nonprofit research firm, that is literally what investors are paying you to do. And you're not making money, you're spending other people's money for those purposes. So in many regards, you are beholden to the people who are funding you. And it's not that that magically changes when you go for profit, but that is a huge factor. And so all of those factors have been going on. Sam Altman recently came out and said, oh, I want to go into for-profit now. Now, going back to my biotech example, where that can be coming from, I don't want to speculate on motives and all that other stuff because I don't think that's always helpful. But logically, to me, this made sense at the end of last year where I went, we're kind of hitting, not that we couldn't go further with AI, but we're kind of hitting a ceiling of adoption and readiness to do things with this from a consumer standpoint. So advancing the AI may not have the same value that it once did. So it would make logical sense for OpenAI to shift their focus to for-profit and say, okay, we're gonna focus on productizing what we have. It's less about building new stuff. It's more about mainstream adoption and actually moving forward with this. Controversially, Sam Altman then in words said, well, that decision, I was on the wrong side of history for that. We should just stay committed to all of this other stuff. Elon Musk comes in to offer the bid. In many ways, and this is what came out in the last 24, 48 hours, Musk is now willing to pull his offer if OpenAI commits to staying a nonprofit entity, which really does then fuel this whole conversation of, so was this just a giant troll? Like, is this just a giant game of chicken that billionaires play because they've got nothing better to do? They just mess with each other and go, oh, you said you're on the wrong side of history. Well, let's just see how wrong you really feel about it. I'll make $100 billion bid and then make conditions that the only way I'll take the bid off the table is if you commit to staying nonprofit. And so some of me just looks at this whole situation and goes, my gosh, we are acting like children in some of this stuff. But I think some of the things we need to be mindful of and be watching about this is there's a lot of incentive for people like Musk and the US government and lots of organizations, not consumer-based. And this is going to tie together to my second point. There's a lot of incentive for a lot of powerful people for OpenAI to not shift to a for-profit model. There are lots of people who want them to continue pushing the boundaries and the edges of what AI is capable of. And so the idea that they might move to a for-profit entity where that's less of their focus, more of their focus is consumer products, corporate, business to business products, making revenue, not just burning cash. Their focus shifts and it takes it off some of that. There's a lot of people who do not want that focus taken off of that. And I think that's what we're seeing play out right here is Musk is essentially saying, okay, well, I don't like what you're doing. So now I'm going to make you have to consider this offer because for folks who may not understand how these things work and how, takeovers work, if Christopher Lin made $1 billion bid to Sam Altman, I sent him a note on LinkedIn and said, hey, Sam, I'd love to buy OpenAI for $100 billion. They would laugh it off and dismiss it because Christopher Lin has zero access to $100 billion. Elon Musk does. And so if the company is looking to go for profit, a legitimate offer for $100 billion, regardless of whether you think that's a stupid offer, a troll offer or not, it's a serious offer. And if you're a company that is looking to be for profit, you have to take it seriously. And given Altman's relationship with the board, it would not be surprising that the board might go, okay, you know what? That's actually a pretty solid deal. Let's just take it. And that could mean all sorts of things. Then again, Musk is in control of it because he goes, hey, it's my money now. I've got the money to do whatever. He, even if he says it's a for-profit entity, he can say, yeah, well, for-profit, I'm paying for it. So that's the profit it makes. And I'm just going to do with it what I want. So this is a little bit of a bully tactic to say, you're going to do what I want you to do, Altman, which is I want you to keep it nonprofit so we can keep pushing the very boundaries of what AI can do and push it to its limits for the purposes of, and I'll tell you right now, not for consumers. It's not so that our image generation tools and our writing tools and our AI agents do a better job at work. There's more going on to the story. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this. You know, the leadership lesson here, there were two leadership lessons that really stood out to me on this one that I think everybody should just consider is, first of all, one, I said this the other day, I think in last week's podcast or something, and if you're in a leadership position, which you all are in leadership positions at some point, but you need to be really careful what you say. And you need to be really careful about the statements and the commitments you make, because when you say stuff, you might just be able to say whatever you want and never really follow through with it and never be held accountable. But then there are times when it comes to roost. And this is an example where Musk goes, oh, you're on the wrong side of history. You really just want to stay nonprofit and you'd love to just push this so far, but you're going for profit. Well, let me just see how serious you are in saying that. And Altman's kind of on the hook for this now. And he's going to either have to eat his words or, say, yeah, anyway. So I think that's one of the big ones is as leaders, be careful what you say, because at some point it's going to come back to bite you if it's not sincere. But two, I think the other one with it is, this is the risk of pursuing things without thinking around corners and not thinking what are the implications of this and then painting yourself into a corner. And I can very much empathize with Altman in the sense that I truly do believe that he got into the AI space thinking, I'm just going to make the world a better place. I'm going to create technology that improves people's lives and makes the world better. And the further along he's gotten, because he has not necessarily, I don't think, done a good job of thinking of how some of this stuff comes to roost. And also, if you don't really have ethical, moral guidelines in what you're doing, it looks good until you're standing in the corner with no other options. And suddenly you're like, how did I get here? And it's like, well, I mean, it looks like you had no choice, but literally you painted yourself into this corner. And I think this is why for leaders and just people in general, you got to be so careful. And you got to make sure, I wrote about it, I think this week or something, about the importance that you put in having values and sticking to those values. Because if your values just shift based on whatever the heck is going on, you're going to find yourself in situations like this. You are going to be painted into corners you don't want to be painted into, and you're not even going to realize you got there until you're there and you suddenly discover it feels like you've got no way out. My final thought is, if you are that person in that corner, there's a way out. You just might not want to take it. And I think that's the thing, is I see this all the time where people paint themselves into corners and then they go, well, there's no way out. And it's like, yeah, there is. It's taking accountability. It's turning from what you're doing. It's acknowledging what you did. And people go, well, I can't do that. And you're like, well, then, yeah, legit, you are in a corner. If you're not going to change your ways, you're going to try and still talk out of both sides of your mouth, then you're right. You are trapped, and this will blow up on you at some point. So I'll be interested to see what happens, whether he takes a deal, whether he doesn't take the deal, whether someone else takes a deal. I mean, if they go for profit, they got to figure it out. And I can tell you right now, productizing their product ain't going to get them anywhere near profitable anytime soon. So they're going to have to get creative with it. Okay, now the next one ties to what I was saying about why there's a lot of people who have a lot of incentives to make sure OpenAI stays nonprofit. And this is something that's been building. And if you've been following me for long, I've been talking about it for a bit. It just only pops up in certain circles or in certain conversations. But we'd like to think that AI is, it's here to make the world a better place. By default, it will always be used for good. Where it's not used for good, it's an exception to the rules. It's a bad actor. It's things like that. And we'd like to think that we're all going to see the benefits of where all these trillions of dollars are going. And we don't really ask questions like, where is all that money going? And what are we doing with it? Well, there was a little bit of a reveal to where some of this stuff is going this last week, over the past week, when Google made a shift. So I'll set the table for this. If you followed Google for very long, you've known they've had controversies as they've scaled up. One of them was when they first started, they had a commitment, and it was, in some ways it was childlike, but I really actually appreciate it. They had a commitment that one of their moral governance standards was don't be evil. Now, we could sit and argue, is that really measurable? How do we measure that? What does that even mean? Evil in the eyes of who? And yes, those are all good things that we should ask. And if you're going to have an ethical statement that says we don't do evil, you sure better well define that, or you're going to get blown up all over the place because you might think you're not doing evil. Someone somewhere on the internet thinks you're doing evil, even if you're not, or even if you're convinced you're not, at least. So I get we could debate that, but they took a ton of heat back in, I don't remember when it was. I think it was 2018. They eliminated Don't Be Evil. And they had already changed it. I'm not going to get into the full history lesson of it here, but it had already been through some transformations. And a lot of the excuses, whatever behind it was, as you get to be a bigger company, as you're more diversified, as you're more involved in different things, it becomes harder and harder to not do evil, especially in a very vague general sense. If you're only doing one thing, it's probably a little easier to go. If you're only doing one thing with 5 people and you only have 100 customers, it's a little easier to go, yeah, we're not doing evil. As it gets bigger, the lack of definition, the lack of, well, what's evil? Evil according to who? Evil against who? Becomes more complicated. And so even when I remember, gosh, people were freaking out when they got rid of Don't Be Evil in like 2018. It was like, oh, this is the end. They are the evil empire out to destroy us all. And I didn't feel that way because I was like, well, in some regards, I understand where they're coming from. I don't like what they're doing, but it was not as nefarious as everybody made it out to be. Now, the more recent one has me more concerned because some of the other chess pieces that are moving on the board. So if you haven't been following Google or Alphabet the last week, one of the things they did was they had a long-standing commitment. It's been, I don't know how long it's been with them. Let's just say it's been with them a very long time. And that commitment was, we will not create AI for the purpose of causing harm. Okay. Which we could have the same argument as the previous one. Well, what's harm? Harming who? How do we define harm? What if I get that. Hey, my point isn't that. But they removed it very quietly. And they just kind of pulled it off, hoping nobody would notice, which in the age of the internet, you can't really get away with anything. But it drew a ton of attention to this, and it drew a ton of attention to something that I think we need to be paying more attention to, which is these big AI companies, going back to my previous point of all these questions around where is all this money going? And what is all this innovation for? To who, for who, and what is the end game with a lot of this stuff? Now, this is not Christopher Lind, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia conspiracy theory type thing. But if you start paying attention to what these big AI companies are doing, the connections they have to big government, the connections they now are establishing with defense companies and all this other stuff, there is a major, major shift that a large portion of the innovation and effort around AI is to be used for militaristic purposes, which, I mean, it would be very understandable why you would want to remove your governing standard of not making AI to cause harm if you fully are aware that a large part of your strategy is to create AI for the purpose of causing harm on other people. Now, this especially is when you put the pieces together, makes sense. Not that I agree with it, but makes sense coming on the heels of Google not necessarily performing real well. They had their earnings call and they did not do as well as they'd like. And usually when people aren't doing as well financially as they like, they start to make compromises. They start getting involved in things they swore that they would never do because, well, I mean, we got to make that money somehow. So, you know, why not tap into the US military complex that spends more money than Lord knows what on anything else? And so this is very much a subtle thing that we as citizens need to be paying attention to. Now, I'm not ringing the alarm bell saying, oh my gosh, look out, everybody. There's going to be armed robots, marching through the streets, shooting people. It's not going to be, what's the Netflix series? Anyway, it's not that. This is not, I'm not talking dystopian type stuff, but I'm talking about the fact that we've largely just come to accept whatever happens as it's probably fine. It's probably good. And we get sucked up in distractions like how old the team members of Doge are, while completely ignoring, wait, where are these hundreds of billions of dollars on AI going? What are we doing with that? What are we targeting? Where's this? What's this going to be used for? For what purposes? And we're easily distracted and we miss some of this stuff. And as a result, we don't notice when all of a sudden, all this money and all this effort that we think is going to make our lives better is actually going to destroy and eliminate lives. Now, for anybody listening who is involved in the military, please do not take this as an anti-military position. I'm not saying I'm against the military. I'm not saying, we shouldn't have a military. I'm not saying let's all just hug and sit around a campfire. I understand we live in a broken world and the military is tragically just a reality of what we have to do. At the same time, as the public who is responsible, one, for funding this, because it's our tax dollars going to a lot of this stuff, but then also just ultimately this stuff will catch up with us as a nation at some point. Like, we can keep fighting to stay on top, but at some point, staying on top comes at a very, very heavy cost, whether it's the cost to maintain it, which ultimately affects things like eggs being $12 a dozen, milk being $10 a gallon, because gosh, we got to keep funding this AI to keep our military on top. But it also affects global tensions. And you can be a world empire that tries to just take over and try and make everybody like us. And you might get away with it for a while, but at some point you finally step on too many people's toes and it blows back up in your face. And so I think this is something we need to be watching and keep being mindful of, and not buying into some of the hype of either, oh, that's not really ever going to happen, and I'd rather get distracted with some of these other things, or buying into the attitude that it's like, anything the military does is good. Anything the US does is good. It's never wrong. And if we decide we're going to go into said country, take it over and make it better, that's a good thing. We need to go, hang on a second. That's easy to say when you're the one doing it. It's not so easy to say if you're on the receiving end. And how do we think about the folks that are going to negatively be impacted by this? Because we're moving so fast with AI, I can already tell you, we are not taking the time to think through the ethical implications of this. There's not going to be the time spent on how do we make sure that we never use this AI in a way that accidentally kills civilians? Not saying nobody's ever asking that question. I'm just saying with the pace things are moving, that's very much a question that would go, yeah, but ultimately, is it killing more of our enemies? All right, well, then, we got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And that whole pressure to just keep moving, regardless of who gets hurt in the process, it's not okay. And we need to be paying attention to this, because I know there are people who, may go, well, there's nothing I can do. Well, maybe not directly, but you can through your votes. You can through writing your Congress people. You can through, maybe there's people who listen who are involved in politics and in the office themselves. Like, there are things we can do that we can say, hey, this is not okay. If 90% of the dollars going to AI investment is going to create super weapons based on this hypothetical threat of, well, if we don't, said whatever country that we know spooks everybody is going to dominate us and take over. Folks, come on, calm down. We're going to burn the world thinking that we're saving it if we're not careful. So I just want to make people aware of this one, because this one's not getting the headline attention that I think it should. And I think that's on purpose. I think it's on purpose because they would rather have us distracted with stuff that ultimately is irrelevant, so that we're not actually paying attention to what's actually happening with a lot of this money and a lot of this technology. All right. So yeah, go ahead. You can look up some things. And I think you'll quickly see that there's a reason Google removed "Don't Make Harmful AI." And they're not the only ones who are making this shift to repurpose their technology for reasons other than giving you friendly chatbots that help you accomplish your tasks. All right, let's talk agents. I did say that I would talk about this last week, and just to give a little bit of the landscape of where agents are. I won't spend a ton of time on it. It's not going to be a deep dive in agents, but I just want to level set for folks so they understand where we are. What does some of this stuff mean? Because if you look around, you will see headlines everywhere that this is the year of agents, right? This is the year of agents, and AI agents are going to do everything. They're going to take over everything. They're going to be able to do everything a human can do and more. And it's the end of work and life as we know it. And now they're working on consumer robots, and they're actual humanoid robotics. And we're going to have humanoid robots taking care of everything. We're just going to, which ties to my last point, by the way, that you'll see here in a minute. So what's really going on with this? And what do we really need to understand about agents? If you're not familiar with agents, AI agents is essentially a multimodal AI. And what I mean by multimodal is it's capable of doing multiple things. Think multitasking. It can do multiple things. Versus most AI is very narrow. It can do specifically what it's asked to do, and that's it. And as we've watched OpenAI and some of these other companies start to expand on the advancement of their technology, it can start to do more things strung together. So I think I mentioned it last week. Now you can have its operator. And there's an example of this the other day where somebody had applied to 1,000 jobs overnight. Well, that's an AI agent doing that work. Okay, you're teaching it, or you're telling it, here's the series of things I want you to do. Now go take care of it. Go search this on the web. Once you do that, then go edit this document over here. Once you edit that document, fill out this form, do this, send this note in LinkedIn to the hiring manager, things like that. And so it can start to, in a sense, give the impression it's doing what a human can do, because that's what humans do. We're not just one track minded. Well, sometimes we can be, but you get what I mean, right? We can do different things. And so that's where everybody's saying, well, now these agents are perfectly capable of doing all different sorts of things. And this is a huge risk for employees, and companies are legitimately buying into this idea that, what do we need a customer service rep for? We'll just have an AI agent do it. Where before these multimodal advanced reasoning models came into play, you kind of did need a human. Like, you might be able to have a chatbot that could do some very basic, question and answer stuff. But there was a reason why the second you asked a chatbot to do something, it would be like, 1 second, please. And then you would find yourself talking to a human, because it couldn't do much more. Now these advanced models are more capable than that. And so you don't necessarily need, and I put that in air quotes for a reason, a person to be involved. Because if, let's say, you have a chat conversation and it goes beyond the scope of what the chatbot can do, the chatbot is now capable of concluding the conversation, filling out a ticket, putting the details from the conversation in the ticket, and passing the ticket off to tier 2. Before, that wasn't necessarily possible. So, especially with companies are going right now, trying to drive down costs, increase revenue, people are messy and complicated. The idea of an AI agent sounds really good because you could say, well, geez, man, wouldn't it just be nice if, I don't know, a digital marketing person. Let's not have a digital marketing person. Let's just have a digital marketing agent, because all a digital marketing person does is does research on what the market trends are. And then they put that together, and then they put together a report, and then they change these things in our media, or they create a video that goes out to try and market this stuff. And again, I'm overgeneralizing. So the digital marketing people, please don't send me a message and say, that's not what I do. I know that's not what you do. But my point is, if you're a C-level executive, it is very easy to just oversimplify what a job is and go, great, an agent can do multiple things. Heck, let's not have a person involved. Let's just get an agent to do that stuff, and let's move in that direction. And companies are doing that right now. It's not going well, but let me give you a perfect example of this. And I mentioned this last week, I think. So Deep Research, OpenAI's Deep Research product came out. All this hype about the fact this is the end of a research analyst. Deep Research is so good, you're not going to need a research analyst anymore. You're just going to have an AI agent that you simply ask for a report. This agent takes care of it for you. And why would I ever have somebody, there to do it? And to be fair, there are things about this that agents can and should do, and it is going to, I tell people all the time, AI is not going to, it is going to eliminate your job as you know it. That's the way I put it. It is going to eliminate your job as you know it today. So if you're just doing what you're doing and you're thinking, I'm just going to keep doing that indefinitely, I'm not going to change anything, you are very much at risk, because these agents are extremely capable and vastly more capable than they've ever been before. So while they used to be very dumb, now they are relatively smart, and they're just getting smarter. So that's the scary part for people. I mean, I'll just be honest. That's a scary part, that these things can come and do parts of what you do probably better than you can. That's not a knock on you and your abilities. That's just the reality of what these agents are. However, before you freak out, I do think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But here's the reality of these agents that companies are quickly discovering. AI can only do what it's told to do. And granted, it can color outside the lines a little bit, but when it does, it colors very poorly. Let's just say that. It doesn't color outside the lines well. So where it knows what it's supposed to do, where it knows the boundaries of what it can do, and where it's given clear data on how to do what it needs to do, it becomes very good at doing those things, which is great. And like I said, also scary, because it means it can eliminate large parts of your job and do it better than you can. However, here's what companies are discovering, and why I tell people don't completely freak out, is that, again, AI agents do things well when they're trained to do things well. We do not have a lot of data on how work really gets done. And this is one of the biggest things missing from senior executives, is they think they understand what a job is based on their assumptions. They do not realize how little they actually understand the job. So even my really bad example of a digital marketing person, isn't all they do is just research competitive intelligence, and then they come back and then they make some decisions about how we position our products against that competitive intelligence? Why don't we just have an agent do that? What do we need a person for? Yeah, a digital marketing person does a lot more than that. And it doesn't always work that clean. You might say, well, we mapped out the process. Why don't we just train an agent to do that? Well, it doesn't work that consistently. And like I said, when AI starts coloring outside the lines, It changes the colors it colors with. It changes the markers. It changes. I mean, it rips the paper in half. Like, it gets really, really, really messy. And if you talk to anybody who's done a lot of work with agents, the people who say agents are amazing and they're going to change work, ask them how much time they've actually spent working with an agent and how much they've actually done with agents. And you will quickly find most of them they're operating off of marketing intel. Anybody I've talked to, and even my own experience with agents, is they can be really helpful, but if you're not careful, you will literally spend more of your time cleaning up their messes than you will benefiting from the work that they did. And that is frustrating and it's annoying, but this is why I continue trying to do work to be like, whoa, folks, be really careful about where you're throwing agents on stuff. Even going back to the deep research stuff. Is deep research really good at doing deep research? Yes, but it requires somebody who can translate what the real needs of a customer are, can prompt and get the specific things it actually needs to find, understand some of the limitations of what you would find, and to be able to, prompt it to give it in a way or filter certain things out that you would say, well, AI knows everything. Wouldn't it just be able to do that? No, because AI still needs to be driven by someone. And so will jobs change significantly? Yes. Will AI change everyone's job as they know it? It absolutely will. But it doesn't mean that it does a good job of replacing a human on a one-to-one basis, unless what that human is doing is extremely repeatable, has very little variance, and you have well documented data on how to do it. So in those cases, sure, an agent can be really great. In cases where there's a lot of risk, there's a lot of variance, the stakes are higher, things like that. You don't have a lot of data on what good looks like, or you're in a space where things are changing all the time, which, hello, we live in a world where things are changing constantly. So agents, by the time they get going, they already are behind. And they do not pick things up as quick as humans do, as much as media would make you think like, yeah, but AI just learns so much faster than people do. It learns off past data faster than humans can. It does not pick up on things we haven't encountered. And when it runs into something it hasn't encountered before, it does not respond the same way a person does. So it's dangerous. And why I say it's going to get worse before it gets better is right now we're in the hype phase where a lot of companies are believing AI agents are the secret weapon to eliminate the hassle of people. And I just saw several companies are dropping double digits of their employees, just wiping them out. And a lot of this, it's not on record that they're doing this, but I'm in enough of these boardroom conversations where a lot of the plans are, we're just going to bring in agents and make up the performance productivity loss with agents. They'll just pick up the slack. And I say it gets worse because we're going to go through that season right now. We already are starting to go through that season. And so we're going to continue to see significant job loss, would be my prediction. Christopher doesn't have a crystal ball. But I think we're going to continue to see some major disruption, major further job loss as we go through this. What I think is going to happen is, and I'm already seeing companies that are starting to turn back from this, is that they're going, well, that really sucked. And now they're reversing course. So it'll get worse. It'll start to get better. But my concern, and the part I think we just need to be really mindful of if you're a decision maker in this, is just like so many things, when we run down a path too fast and we don't think things through, and then we get punched in the face for doing it, we tend to snap back to a state that was even less or worse than we were before. And I think we're seeing this with the return to office stuff, where it's like people's jobs were relatively flexible before. Maybe work from home wasn't totally a thing, but a lot of people were in the office and out of the office, and it wasn't that big a deal. Nobody really asked questions as long as you were getting your job done. Then the pandemic hit, it swung way on the outside. People were uncomfortable. It's not that performance gains were higher than they'd ever been, so that wasn't it. But people were uncomfortable. And so now we're snapping back to this. You must be in the office 5 days a week, whatever. And it's like, we just went backwards. What the heck? And I'm concerned, and that's probably the risk I want to call attention to encourage people not to fall into, is if you are moving down this agent path, one, be thoughtful, be really intentional, and think through how you're using it. Because if you don't, you're going to get burned. And I am telling you this from the work I do. It will make a bigger mess. You will spend more money, more headache cleaning it up than you will on it. And subtle plug, if you need help with that, call me. I'm happy to help with it, but please be careful with it. But if you're too late, if you already went headfirst into the deep end of the pool or the shallow end of the pool and you, bam, knocked your head on the bottom and went, oh, wow, I thought this was a bottomless pool. Well, it wasn't. You cracked your head, might have fractured a few vertebrae. Just don't in return go, well, I'm never going to go swimming now. And I think that's my concern, is that as people start to get burned by these agents, they're going to assume, see, AI is bad. This is why we don't do anything. I would not be surprised if we start seeing like enterprise bans on AI because they get burned so bad and people freak out. And that's just the worst. That would actually be worse, because we would actually go backwards. And agents and AI can be extremely helpful when used properly. That's the key. Okay. Let me move on to my last one, because this actually ties to the previous one, which is there is a big research study that was put out by Microsoft that is catching all sorts of headlines and attention, and the number of clickbait articles I've seen on it. I've actually read the research report, which is why the clickbait articles just drive me nuts, because it's like, this does not represent the study well. But some research came out from Microsoft that was talking about the erosion of critical thinking and empathy as a result of AI. Okay. And so they did some research into this. Now, trick for anybody who ever looks at a research report, please, 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 first thing you do, scroll to the bottom of the research report, read their conclusions thoroughly. Okay. And don't just pick the parts you like, read the full conclusion. Once you read the full conclusion, go back about one page usually and read the limitations. This is just a productivity hack to keep you balanced and keep you in the right space if you're reading research, because research is extremely difficult to go through if you're not familiar with it and if you're not super into that space. It's a ton of stuff and you're like, what was this experiment? What was this experiment? All this other stuff. But if you read the conclusion, you can already start to draw, well, what did they conclude from? And it'll help you then go back and read the parts of the report that tie to the conclusion. Oh, they must have drawn that conclusion from here. They must have drawn that conclusion from here. Now I'm making context of this. If you don't know what the end is, then you'll miss it. And I just see so many people who read the stuff in the middle. They draw their own conclusions based on this stuff. And it's like, no. That is like the wrong way to approach research at all. Do not look at the middle, then reverse engineer your own conclusions based on that, and then go according to research, blah. And it's like, that's not according to research. That's according to your cherry-picked interpretation of one of the components of the research that you read that you didn't even fully understand. If you go to the conclusion, you'll see the experts who actually are involved in this, they looked at all this stuff. They drew their own conclusions on this, on what you can pull from that. Now, absolutely go back and look into what they said and double check and cross check what that is. I'm not discouraging from you doing that and just saying, just trust what the experts say. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is do that, but then also make sure you read the limitations before you go back and start spouting off things about the research, because the limitations will always give you a very, very accurate peg on how much should I really be walking away from this? And it's not like it'll say, here's what the research say, the limitations, blah, 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 will now disregard all the research. But honestly, sometimes after I read the limitations, I throw the whole research paper out, because I'm like, okay, by the time you eliminate all those limitations, this research literally tells you nothing. Now, that was a long introduction to how to read a research report, but I'm sharing that with you because if you actually go look at this research from Microsoft, you will start to understand all the hype about the fact that, oh my gosh, AI is destroying critical thinking and creativity is going down the toilet and blah, blah. Like it's the end of the end. It's overhyped. And if you really look into it, I think there's only like 319 people that it looked at. And these were all just qualitative questions. How do you feel it affect? So you got to be really, really careful with this stuff. Now, granted, there were some things they actually tested that showed they had, used less critical thinking skills and stuff like that. So there's some legitimacy to the report, but it would be easy to get into one of these super divisive arguments that AI is evil and is going to destroy the human brain, or that's a bunch of hooey. There's no merit to anything this thing said. And if you believe that, you're an idiot. AI is going to save us all and make our lives better. It's not either of those two. It really, truly, digging through the research actually validates a lot of the things that I think many of us probably, if we think about it, logically go, yeah, I guess that does make sense. But that I've been trying to help people understand through this podcast and the work I do so that we avoid the risks. Because the reality is when you read the limitations and the conclusions, here's what I will tell you right now. AI does not inherently destroy your critical thinking or your creativity or your ability to innovate. But by itself, it does not do that. It, by default, will encourage that kind of behavior. So to the folks who have AI is inherently good, one, that's not backed by data. Second, just common sense. Think about it. AI enables our own behaviors. What are our behaviors? Well, they're usually not good. Regardless of whether you agree with my worldview or not, our default posture to things is bent towards selfishness, pride, greed, all this stuff. So when you take that into account, then you can walk away from this research from Microsoft and go, okay, so to deny the fact that our critical thinking skills, our creativity, and our ability to do complex reasoning is at risk, it would be foolish to ignore those things. It really, truly would. And if you're just somebody who's like, that's stupid and I'm just going to go with it, I'm telling you, it's worth checking out Microsoft's research report on it because it does highlight some of these risks. However, if you're someone that thinks AI is evil and going to destroy mankind, and if you use it, your brain's going to melt and turn into goo, if that's what you walk away from this report from, then I would encourage you to go back to the limitations and actually read the conclusions that it talks about. Because the reality is, it's highlighting some serious risks. And I think where you look at it, many of the exercises that they did is, and this is one of the cautions. I just saw an ad for this the other day. OpenAI now can automate all of your tasks. And it sounds really good on the surface. Great. I don't like to think about this. I'll just let AI take care of it for me. On the surface, that sounds really good. But the problem is, when things start to be automated, you stop thinking. The more you automate, the less you're thinking, because you're not thinking about the things that are happening. And, if I do this, that has implications on this. Maybe I need to make a different decision. It's just happening and you're not putting thought into it. And what they did find with this is your critical thinking skills and your complex reasoning will start to erode. It'll start to atrophy, which, as I read the report, I went well, duh. I mean, anybody who's done anything with human fitness or physical fitness knows if you don't use a muscle, what happens to it? It atrophies. If you don't lift weights for years and years and years and you go into the gym, are you going to be stronger? No. The science and the data shows that. You don't need me to tell you that. If you used to bench 225, you took 2 years off and you go bench and you throw 225 on the rack, I can promise you there's a good chance you might choke yourself out. So the same is true with your brain. Your brain works on very similar levels in that use it or you lose it. And so this is something that we do need to take seriously, because there is so much pressure right now, and our own tendencies towards complacency, comfort, thinking I'm just tired, which right now we're super vulnerable to this. We're cognitively fatigued. There's so much going on sometimes. And I'm a dad of 8. I got a lot going on with work. I create more content than I know what to do with. There are times I go, I just really wish I could turn my brain off. I just really wish I could turn it off, hit cruise control, and just wake up, in a couple months and just, pick back up. But we have to fight past that, because the reality is the data is showing, which, like I said, should not be surprising, that if you do that, you are going to lose these abilities. And going back to the creativity, same thing. If you're automating things, you're not thinking about the problems that you're running into. You're not thinking about challenges. It's not forcing you to go, how could we do that differently? If it's just happening, you're not going to challenge things. And this is exactly what you see in big corporations that have just been doing things the way they've always done it for extended periods of time. People have eroded their complex thinking skills. And I think the thing I would just say with this, though, is this is not an AI problem. This is a human problem. And I say it all the time. AI just turns the volume up on what's already happening. So by default, are we moving towards delegating and not wanting to process, and we just would much rather take a nap and go through life and wake up on the other side? Yes. And so as a result, when AI comes in and going, you want to do that? Hey, I can help. What do you need me to do so you'd have to think less? What do you need me to do so you have to do less? How do I make your life easier so you don't actually have to process or deal with any of this crap? That's a very tempting offer. I am not suggesting that everything you do is worthwhile and that you shouldn't automate anything. I think that's one of the risks that you could take from this paper is you go, see, it's really bad. So it's really good that we just wrestle through unnecessary complexity all the time. Keeps our brain sharp. No, it doesn't. Cognitive fatigue is something else that is real. And if we are not careful, we're going to just keep pushing ourselves and go, well, now we got to keep up in the AI world, but we're afraid to use AI because we don't want to become stupid. And so then we just end up in cognitive fatigue, which is just like overtraining a muscle. You overtrain a muscle, you become weaker. It's no different than not lifting it at all. It atrophies. It's just a different kind of thing. So I think this goes back to my kind of concluding thoughts on it is this is why we need to be very surgical, very thoughtful, very intentional about how we're using AI and what we're doing and really thinking this stuff through. Because are there things that it's okay to get dumber at? Yes. Is it fine that I don't remember all the long division equations that I used to because now computers can do it for me? Yeah. Is it good that I still remember how they function and how they're structured and how they're supposed to work so that when I see AI doing something, I can either go, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. There's something off with that. Yes. And I think threading that needle is going to look different for everybody, but we've got to watch it because if we don't, we are just going to become mindless mush if we're really not careful. So those are my 4 for this week. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you have a great Valentine's Day, a great rest of your week, great weekend, and all that good stuff. And we will see you on the other side.